Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Stephan. Let's do this. Hey gang, I was recently a guest on the Flagship Freedom podcast. I thought you might like to give it a listen. Now, a little background. Longtime listeners of Choice Conversations will know that, it used to be a variety show. I didn't cover just personal development. And one of the topics that would regularly pop up would be politics and libertarianism. And I'd recorded a series under that topic about the alt-right personality Stefan Molyneux. And Wes Bertrand was my co-host for that series. And we were very critical of Stefan, as he had done a complete 180 on his position, switching from liberty and freedom towards the alt-right. And this coincided with the presidential candidacy of Donald Trump. So this was in late 2015 through early 2016 was when those shows aired. So before Trump was elected. And those episodes were, very popular. I mean, for my show at least, they got a lot of downloads, a lot of views, especially on YouTube. They're some of the most watched videos I put on YouTube. And definitely some of the most feedback I've gotten, has been associated with those videos. And so, they wanted me on Flagship Freedom to talk about that series. And I went on there. I thought it would be fun. I still enjoy talking about politics from time to time. I just don't really want it to be a part of Choice Conversations per se. So I went on there and had a good time with the interview. And I had no plans really to post it into the Choice Conversations feed. But then afterwards I was listening to it and I said, there's a lot of good personal development lessons in here. The talking about why I'm no longer really that interested in politics, why I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of energy in that area, why I don't get riled up about it, have a lot of emotional investment, and the concept of spheres of influence and, what I actually have control over. Those are all very good things for people to review that are looking at personal growth, that are in the personal development area. So I went ahead and decided to put it here and post it on Choice Conversations as well, to repeat the interview here. So I think you'll find value in it. I mean, even if you're not a libertarian, even if you don't know who Stefan Molyneux is, the conversation kind of transcends that, where it's more just talking about, is politics an important thing to be spending your time and energy on? So check it out. I hope you like it.
All right, everybody. Welcome back again on this beautiful, gorgeous Sunday morning. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Chris Stefanik of Choice Conversations. Now, Chris has a very vibrant podcast with all kinds of cool material, from life improvement, productivity hacks, all sorts of really useful stuff that I've enjoyed and found a lot of value in. But he's also an ANCAP, believe it or not. Wouldn't it just happen to be like that all the smart people out there subscribe to volunteerism? So, and particularly, Chris came out with a really fascinating 5-part series, which I've listened to every single second of, in regards to Stefan Molyneux, who I'm sure you've heard his name thrown around here, and his recent devolve into populist kind of statism politics, that whole swamp, that whole can of worms. So anyways, Chris, Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
So Chris, why don't you tell us about Choice Conversations? What's the purpose? What's the general idea? Why do you do it? And how it comes back to the liberty movement? Is it primarily a liberty project, or is it just your, a way for you to get your thoughts and your life out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is not clear and concise, unfortunately. It takes a little bit of time. Originally, Choice Conversations was a variety show, and it was basically just whatever I felt like talking about that day. And I'd actually inherited the podcast from a gentleman by the name of Steve Patterson. He had a podcast called Two Beers with Steve, and that was running for years. And I was a fan of that show and ended up being a co-host with him. And when he decided to, hang up his podcasting gloves and retire, he just gifted me the show, and I changed the name to Choice Conversations. So, like I said, it started off just being a variety show, and liberty is one of the things I'm very interested in. So that was a topic that came up a lot. But as time went on, it's really became more of a personal development podcast. So I was kind of all over the place, and I started taking the podcast like very seriously and wanting it to be successful. And one of the things that they tell you in podcasting or just in business in general is that if you cast your if you cast your net too wide, then you end up being, it's just, you don't really end up appealing to anyone. If you try to appeal to everyone, you don't appeal to anyone, where it's better to niche down a little bit. Now, Choice Conversations still covers a wide range of topics, because personal development dips into a lot of different areas. So, I have things like, getting financial freedom, finding your purpose and happiness, and improving your relationships, healing, trauma and psychological wounds and stuff like that. There's still a lot of different areas it goes into. It's not niched down too terribly much, but one of the things I ended up cutting out is I don't really talk about liberty anymore. But I still love talking about it, like being a guest on like great shows like this. So it's cool to get that opportunity still.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because most people who are liberty advocates, it's not like a little compartment in their life. It's like a central purpose. I know that's the way it is for me. And I was sort of astounded as I'm listening to your podcast. Like, I listened to your how to eat as much as you want and still lose weight. And I'm like, this guy is like an encyclopedia. You seem to have researched this stuff to an incredible degree of confidence. And then, to get to the point where you are, where you're able to critique people like Stefan Molyneux, that requires years, literally years of, consuming content, thinking about these things, sort of sharpening your own beliefs. So, I do find that interesting. Of course, liberty is not the only thing in our lives, even though we may make it seem like that at times. But certainly I know that, like, to become an ANCAP, you have to be very dedicated to these things. So was that something that you said you've sort of cut that out? And this is just, out of interest in your project. Is that because it's kind of a separate concept and it doesn't really fit into the personal development sphere?
So it's twofold. One, there's that, there's a lot of people that are out there that are interested in personal development that aren't necessarily also interested in liberty and libertarianism and the like, right? So you're really, if my target crowd is ANCAPs or libertarians that are really interested in personal development, as it is, you're already looking at a pretty small percentage of the population that's ANCAP, right? Or even if you just go the other subset, a small percentage of the population that's interested in personal development. And when you put those two together, it's, you've really niched down, and it's okay to really niche down, but it's not, they don't complement each other. It's one thing if you're niching down, right. Like, okay, there's the personal development sphere, and then within that, there's relationships, improving your relationships. And you can niche down even further than that. You can say, well, I want to work on like more romantic relationships, making them awesome, or maybe the parent-child relationships. So do a parenting podcast. If you're niching down where something makes sense, there's tons of really great parenting podcasts or ones for, finding romance or whatever. Pick any area you can niche down. But when they're not even really related, now you're just like chopping out people for like no good reason, almost. And so there's that aspect of it. The other aspect is one, I just found that concentrating on libertarianism and politics in particular wasn't improving my life. So, there's this concept of like the spheres of influence, right? And I'm not the one that invented this. I think the first place I heard it was from Brett Veinotte in the School Sucks podcast, but I don't think he invented it either. But so the idea is things that are closer to you, you have more power over, and things that are farther away from you, you have less power over. So the areas where you have the most power, you have the most ability to make changes, is with yourself. If you're working on yourself, you have tremendous ability to change your life and to make it better or to make it worse. You have a lot of power in that area. The next area where you have the most power is in your close relationships. So this would be your significant other, your children, maybe your really closest friends. You have a lot less power than you have over yourself, like orders of magnitude less than you have over yourself. But you have a lot more than if you go one sphere out from that, which is then just like, associates or whatever like that. You have a lot less power there. There's just, the further you keep going out, the less power you have. And for politics, it's just so far out there. I have no ability to change like what the Federal Reserve does, or to get some law passed or repealed or whatever the case may be in Washington. I found that it's one of those things where it was just like it seemed like a waste of time. It's like my vote doesn't matter, and even if let's say I did vote on something and it came down to one vote, right? And so my vote mattered. A lot of times they'll do something different anyway. Like around here, they put, this, just to give you an example of how frustrating politics can be. On the local ballot, they were trying to pass bonds. They wanted to pass bonds for money for the school or something like that, right? Infrastructure projects. And they put it on the ballot, and the people didn't vote for it. Well, the government just went ahead and issued the bonds anyway. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so it's like, that was the big thing. So I'm sitting there looking, I'm like, okay, I do enjoy talking about politics. I do enjoy talking about freedom. And there are different ways to implement freedom in your life. And I certainly get into those areas in Choice Conversations now that it's a personal development podcast, but it doesn't really have necessarily the flavor of libertarianism. If you were not a libertarian, just somebody more mainstream in your political beliefs, and you're listening to me talk about how I implement freedom in my life, you would really almost have no idea that I'm coming from, a libertarian or an ANCAP background. You'd just be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'd like to do that. So that's, for me, that was the kind of the guiding things when I was looking at what direction did I want to take Choice Conversations, and what direction did I want to take my life? Because the podcast is really an expression of my life and the direction I'm going and what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, it is certainly frustrating. I can attest to that, the whole political realm, or philosophical too. Like when I'm browsing Facebook and I happen to click on like a CNN article, and I just go through the comments, and the top comment has like 20,000 likes, and it's like, vaccination should be mandatory no matter what. Like that's not a good one, because that makes me sound like a kook already. I've been digging into that, and actually I have a child on the way, so maybe I'll have to talk to you a little more in the future. But between that or any kind of the statist cancer out there, it's incredibly disheartening that how entrenched we still feel. But at the same time, it gives me some pride, because I get to claim that I'm down in the trenches, and maybe 20 years later, if we ever make any progress in this movement, we can say we were part of it. So that's a badge of honor. But oh yeah, one last thing. I know my listeners are wondering what the hell we're talking about here, but you're such an interesting guy. I had to ask, have you ever heard of polyphasic sleep?
I just literally Friday released a show on this. So,
oh no way!
Did you look at that and get?
No, I did, because I've been doing the Everyman for quite a while now.
The Everyman. Tell me which schedule is that?
That's like 3. Well, there's a few variants, but I do like 3 or 3.5 hours at night, and then just 2 20-minute naps during the day. Mm-hmm. And this is the author of the book Uber Sleep. What's her name? I forget. Her screen name is Pure Doxic, or however you pronounce it. Right. That's what she does now. Of course, there's more extreme, right, as like the Uberman and all that. But I guess in 30 seconds, is this something that you do? I mean, you made a show about it.
So I did it for a few months, and I would say that it was not successful. I mean, I was successful in that I was able to do it for months and function and be fine, but it wasn't, the cons were outweighing the pros for me.
What schedule did you do?
So I started off with just the segmented schedule, which is where you do a 3.5 hour core, you're up for 2 hours, and you do a 3.5 hour second core.
Oh, okay.
And then you do a 20-minute nap in the afternoon. So you're not really saving any time. You're still sleeping, 7+ hours a night. But supposedly on that schedule, a lot of people, even though, you're not gaining all these waking hours because you're sleeping less, people just felt amazing because it was more natural. It was more in tune with the human circadian rhythms. So I tried that, and there's mixed results. I did a whole hour podcast on it, so I don't want to go into too much details needed at the show. But, and I was okay on that one. But the ones where I would go with less sleep, so something like the Everyman, like I try to, there's a dual core one, or a dual core, I don't know so this one, it's like the segmented sleep schedule I just described, except for your second core is shorter. So you do 3.5 hours asleep, 4 hours awake, 1.5 hours of sleep, and then a nap in the afternoon. And when I went to that, I found that I was tired. But one of the things I think might be going on is I think I might have like a sleep apnea or something like that, where, to give you an example, my wife tells me that when I'm sleeping, I sound like Darth Vader, my breathing. And so I'm like, that can't be good. So I've got a physical scheduled with the doctor in a month or so here. And that's one of the things I'm going to ask. I'm going to have the test run to see. And, the thought occurred to me, I'm like, if this works out where I just need, like, what do they call it, a CPAP machine or something? There's different devices you can use to help you to sleep if you have these issues. And I'm like, if that works out and that solves my problem, now all of a sudden my sleep goes through the roof, where my quality of sleep is so much better. I'm definitely going to go back and check out some polyphasic sleep, because so many people are doing it. Well, I shouldn't say so many people. Very, very few people are doing it. But the people that are doing it, they're getting some amazing results where, even on something as extreme as the Uberman, where you're just doing like 6 20-minute naps. I mean, if you do the math, that's just 2 hours of sleep, 22 hours awake. I mean, there are people that are, feeling really alert and energized, and, and they're very productive and all of that. So,
yeah, truly amazing.
Yeah. So it's definitely something I want to revisit down the road if I discover that I've got some kind of sleep issue going on and I'm able to resolve that. So,
yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit that when I do stick to it, everything's great. And of course, I have more than enough time to do everything I want. But my only issue is that I have god-awful motivation right now, which I'm really embarrassed to say. It's affecting me negatively in many aspects of my life. Although I don't beat myself up too much, because it's like, oh man, I woke up at 7 today. Like, oh, congratulations, you're on par with every, normal person. So I guess I try to hold myself to a high standard, but, I just need to buckle down and hold myself accountable. Anyways, let's get to the main topic, which was what I like to call the power of principle. And what we've sort of noticed in the liberty movement, particularly, I think, leading the charge, is Stefan Molyneux, our fallen hero, who was once a great champion of liberty, now doesn't even try, doesn't even care anymore. People refer to him, outsiders, as an alt-right thought leader on YouTube, which is basically what he is now.
Sure.
Not even, the word anarchy or volunteerism barely escapes his lips these days. And I think he's had a hugely negative impact. I think he's been leading the charge for people like Christopher Cantwell, this whole libertarian fascism thing, which is absolutely blows my mind. But basically, they're casting their lot with the political process again. And not even like, okay, guys, let's vote Ron Paul, let's vote, minarchists. No, now they're talking like, we need to deport people, we need to implement fascism. I mean, Steph hasn't gone that far, but many of his followers have, to say like, no, we literally need to murder people, and then the government will let us implement anarcho-capitalism. It's not going to, we're not going to have this full swing boot on our necks, and then it's, going to crush us until we die. Of course, that's my primary criticism, is that you can't just turn the government off after you've used it to crush your enemies. It's going to kill you. But, I wanted to get your sort of take on the whole thing. I know you've done, already a 5-hour series, but in a nutshell, is that an accurate description? Why have people gone down this route? What is it? What can we possibly explain the late madness going on in the liberty movement?
All right. So first of all, I just wanted to say that when I started this series, I'm looking at it right now on my podcast. The first episode of the Fall of Stefan Molyneux series on Choice Conversations was released on October 9th, 2015. So this was when, Trump was not even the libertarian, or I'm sorry, certainly not the libertarian candidate. He was not like the Republican nominee yet. It was still very much up in the air who was going to be the Republican candidate. And this was like the first you started hearing Molyneux talk about Trump. And so at this point, when I released the show, he still had a lot of his old followers that were like, Steph is an anarchist. What are you talking about? Why, he doesn't support Trump. And I got like all this feedback of people saying, clearly, what are you talking about? Steph is an anarchist. This isn't what he's, and I'm like, are you listening to the shows? He clearly is supporting Trump. At the time they would argue with me, but he's not saying we should go vote for Trump. And I'm like, maybe he's not explicitly saying it, but the implied message is you should be going and voting for him. He's, because he had did in the past all these shows about anarchism, every single side of it, and he had like a 2-part series on why you shouldn't vote and like mocking people who were into voting.
Oh yeah,
mocking libertarians.
That was my favorite. My favorite content was his video, "The Truth About Voting." He just rips it. Like, why are you begging? Like, this is a degrading experience. Like, you fools who are wasting your time in politics.
Yeah, and I mean, he openly laughed at them, and then. And so it wasn't until like, I think it was around like when I released the 3rd or 4th part of the series, by then he actually kind of came out and said, you should vote for Trump. But this was like, a couple months later. I wasn't releasing these shows, weekly or anything. So let's see, like part 5 came out in April of 2016, just to put that in perspective. So 5-part series released over, what is that, about a 6 or 7 month period. So it was slowly, more information was coming out. But I got all these people were just arguing with me. They're like, no, this isn't what Steph's saying. And I'm like, okay, he's really dancing around because he's completely changing his tune. So he's, in the beginning, he was very implicit with this message. And to now, it's like you were just saying, now he doesn't even try. Now he's just clearly alt-right and is like, support Trump. I remember when Trump got elected, the morning after.
Oh, God.
The morning after, he released a podcast where he's singing the national anthem.
Oh my God, yeah.
That was all.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that was all it was him singing the national anthem, this podcast. And he had, in the past, released one where he was mocking people for, like, being patriotic and singing the national anthem and how, robotic people were, just getting emotional when they sing the national anthem. And I'm like, so he completely did a 180 on his position.
Literally, it doesn't get more diametrically opposed than that.
Right.
Yeah, so it really doesn't.
So if your listeners go back and listen to that series, they might be like, because I'm sitting there making the case that Steph is for Trump, and they'd be like, well, yeah, duh. what are you doing?
Right.
At the time, it really wasn't like, it was not so in your face. And so just put that in, keep it in perspective. This was during the transition period where he was, and it really, you could tell that Steph was feeling the waters out to see how it would be received. So he even, his very first show, I believe it's the first show where he talked about Trump, he had it be one of his like right-hand man, his like chief of operations or whatever his name is.
Mike,
right. It was like Mike's idea. Oh, so, Mike, you wanted to talk to me about this Trump thing. What did you have in mind? And he's like, oh yeah, I'm very interested, Steph, and blah, blah, blah. Let's listen to this and listen to this and let me know what you think. And Steph's like, oh, that's interesting. And it was really like they were just, let's just feel, put a toe in the water and just see what it feels like and see how the crowd responds. And, there's been a lot of people who have said, well, like, why did Steph do this? What was the possible motivation? And I think, and I don't know. So, keep this in mind. This is just pure speculation. Who knows? But my guess is, he's like, okay, let's see. There are, a couple million libertarians out there, and caps even less than that. And meanwhile, there's, hundreds of millions of Republicans out there. Like, I make my living off of donations. If I, increase my pool of potential donors by, 100-fold, that increases my income by 100-fold or whatever, and so let's just see what happens if I start to test those waters. And he did. It was well received. He surprisingly didn't get nearly as much backlash from the libertarian community. I was definitely like a minority voice even among ANCAPs.
Mm-hmm.
And so he then went full hog into it, and he's had just enormous growth on his show from that. So the motivation and just the way he has operated seems to line up, that he just basically sold out to go to a larger crowd, gave up on his principles. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe that's not true. Maybe he's just like, you know what? Because this is what his followers will tell you. So they will say, well, Steph is a philosopher. And when you're a philosopher, you're always weighing the evidence. When new evidence comes in, when better arguments come in, you change your position. You shouldn't be locked into your position.
Which is exactly what he said, but
right,
of course.
Right. So that's what they're saying. He just has better, he heard better arguments. He had more evidence. Right. He weighed it and he changed his position. That's a sign of a good
it's
philosopher.
Good.
Yeah.
He's actually a genius.
Right. And it's like, but now his message is so inconsistent. It's full of contradictions because just the government itself is just one big contradiction, right? So he's embraced all of that, and it goes into, you can tell it's like he's now cozying up to the alt-right, these people, because his position on this is completely unrelated, but well, I should say it's unrelated, but he's changed his position on religion. He's still an atheist, but before, instead of slamming religion and being really pro-atheism, he now has like cozied up to religion because that's what, many of the people on the alt-right, many of the people that are Republicans are very Christian. That's one of the things that attracts them to being Republican is
right.
that's supposedly the Christian values party, right? So now he has nothing but good things to say about Christianity. And he talks about how well it served Western civilization.
There are just too many instances of this like extreme hypocrisy for it to be a coincidence. Like, I was willing to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. Like, for example, like if you're one of those ANCAPs who vote, like, I can understand that. I disagree with it, but if you think that's the way to bring about liberty, but he, like you said, he was slamming atheism. He makes these clickbait titles that are like, I forget the one about atheism, but it was as if it were a Christian. It's like why I changed my mind about atheism or something ridiculous like that.
Right.
And it makes it seem like he did a 180. And then you go and listen to it, and what he says is like, he's slamming atheists for being so harsh on religious people. Like, well, what are you going to replace it with when you get rid of it? Are we just going to have, these empty vessels of people who have no purpose? Is like, is that what happened to you, Steph? Or did you actually discover a thing called secular humanism, and good without God and all of this stuff? It's like, and just to give our listeners a sense, if you haven't been in the liberty movement for years, the reason this is so important is because this was a guy who encouraged people to disavow their families, to cut contact with their parents if their parents did not become anarchists. If they I can understand if you're one of those, lukewarm voluntarists who believes in the political process, if you've always been like that. But Steph has not retracted any of his old videos. He's not acknowledged any of his hypocrisy. And it's just extremely troubling to people who have sort of given him the benefit of the doubt and followed him through. And, he has influenced a lot of people, myself included, to the power of principle to such a degree that, like he said, it doesn't matter how we're going to build the roads. It doesn't matter how we're going to do X, Y, and Z. What matters is that as long as we follow principle and we do things the right way, just like a scientist follows the laws of physics, everything else falls into place. It always works like that. And as soon as you abandon those principles and you think you know how to point the gun and steer, the super tanker of the state, is when you crash into an iceberg. And what he's done, in my opinion, is sabotaged the only thing that the movement had. The only real lightning rod that attracts people is consistent principles. Now, if we're rooting for politicians, everybody's an expert. Everybody thinks they know, the next policy, the next vote, the next law, when in reality, it's a giant cluster. And, it's like the blind leading the blind.
Right. Yeah, it's it's really a shame because Steph is very, very talented at communicating. He's clearly a very smart, very bright guy, very quick on his feet, and he makes like beautiful analogies and metaphors. He's like the master of the metaphor, and he was really able to communicate these ideas of freedom and anarchism and atheism and philosophy and the truth and principles to a wide number of people. He was a person that his message got through to quite a few people. He was very influential on me. I had him on Choice Conversations multiple times.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
So
I think he's been on the show like 3 times. So
wow.
He was, and that was one of the reasons why I felt like I had to come out and make a statement, is because the direction he was going. I mean, sure, there's a lot of people out there I don't agree with, right? And I'm not making shows about them, or let alone 5-part series. But they weren't also on my show. They weren't on my show with me like praising how influential they were on me and thanking them for their contributions to the world and to myself personally and things of that nature. And I'm like, I really feel like I need to publicly distance myself from Steph. After things that I've said on the show in the past, both with him as a guest and when he was not on the air. There was other times when I was, very complimentary to him and recommending people check out this video or that video.
Oh yeah. I made CDs of his monologues and gave them to my family. Like, it's embarrassing at this point.
Yeah, and it's like, when you go check it out now, you're like, oh my God,
Yeah, please. Like, he's Rush Limbaugh now.
Yeah.
Have you seen his video where he talks about, he calls it like the New World Order, something or other, and he talks about the temptation of, joining the New World Order cult, shadow organization that's going to lead the world. And he says, oh yeah, like if I got a call from these people, and they recognized how influential and how talented I was, and, could I join them and I could have all this power? Yeah, man, that's so tempting. Sometimes I fantasize about it. It's like, Steph, you really have an overblown ego. Like, that's one thing I've noticed about the guy progressively over time. He thinks hugely of himself. And I could list multiple examples, but I personally believe his ego is out of control and has had a huge influence on his direction, his inability to apologize, to retract any of his messages. And I think that I don't trust the guy anymore, basically, which is really shocking and surprising because he used to be, Mr. Moral, staunch, upright. But I have doubts. I have doubts about his character at this point, which is really, really surprising.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a guy who literally wrote the book on ethics. He's got universally, man, I can't even say it. Universally Preferable Behavior is a book he wrote on secular ethics.
Yep, I listened to that. It was 5 hours.
Yeah, and but yeah, you're right. It's at the point now where I really think he will say whatever needs to be said in order to appease the alt-right crowd, in order to get them cheerleading behind him and clicking that donate button. So
I think, sorry to interrupt, I personally think it's a testament to the idea that power corrupts. Even though, he doesn't have government power, he's got a massive influence. Just literally thousands or hundreds of thousands of people adoring him. That has an effect on people. I know for sure. And I think that's clouding his judgment and inflating his ego. And if anything, what we can learn from the guy is that as people get bigger and bigger, they have a really hard time resisting, the massive windfall of fame and influence and perhaps even money they get just from, a quick violation of principles. And, before you know it, it's out of control. It's like a drug. It's an addiction, as he himself has said.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point. And again, this is just speculation on our part, but maybe it was also the power trip. Maybe not at a conscious level he was thinking this. Maybe at the conscious level he was thinking about money or something like that. But maybe it's just, the guy clearly has an ego, right? Maybe there was a lot of appeal to him having, I don't even know how many times he grew in size by making this switch, probably at least 10 times. the number of subscribers on his YouTube channel and things of that nature. I'm sure that at some level there was an appeal, and maybe that's what this is about. Maybe it's about power, not so much money. And again, it might not be a conscious thing, but it subconsciously, with a guy like him that's very clearly has a big ego, that could be the motivation. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever the motivation is for it, we'll never know, and it doesn't really matter.
Right.
What's important is just recognizing the principles and being able to identify where he's no longer following your own principles, right? You want to be able to not just trust authority figures and be like, oh, Stefan Molyneux was a guy I trusted. He's an authority figure. I'm going to, take whatever he says and accept it. You need to be able to identify when people you trust, when people that have added value to your life in the past are saying things that no longer align, and be able, just be open to questioning anything, questioning anyone. So that's kind of the important thing to take away. I hate to almost spend too much time speculating on what the motivation is behind it, because it really doesn't matter.
You're right. Yep. It is, it's stupid at this point. We are going to continue to carry the flag and do our best, but oh well. No regrets. He did a good job when he, years ago. I can never, take that away from him. I give him a lot of credit. But whatever happened. And, you're absolutely right. At this point, I've spent enough energy agonizing over, a guy who I've never even met, So what do you think is the best way to advance the cause of liberty? I personally, like I said, I believe it's consistent principles, because, people will listen to you and consider you over months and years before they change their mind. And only if you are the only person who doesn't make, these logical contradictions and flaws. I think that's the only thing we've got reality on our side, and eventually people can no longer deny that our message aligns with truth, reality, the human condition more so than anyone else's. But what are your thoughts? I know you're more, you have a lot more expertise when it comes to human psychology. Perhaps there are better methods.
Right. Well, I've kind of given up on trying to advance the message in any kind of way, like what you're doing. I mean, I really respect what you're doing, and I still listen to liberty-minded podcasts out there. I love Tom Wood's show, and my buddy Anthony Samroff has a great show called the Scottish Liberty podcast, and there's several others, in addition to the fine work you're doing. But as far as like what do I think is the best method for people to do, I just don't know. I mean, I really don't know, because people's defenses are so high when you're like trying to get them to see things a different way. It's really really hard. I mean, they don't want, it's like to get them to see that government isn't the solution. There's so many dominoes have to fall, and so many of the things that they've accepted before, they have to change those beliefs. They've put so much personal investment into believing that things have to be this way or this way. Because if they're not, then that means that I'm just getting screwed. All this money that's being taken from me it's really not for the best. And I'm actually a slave. I'm just not, maybe I'm not 100% slave like, it was for people on plantations a couple hundred years ago, but I'm a partial slave. And that it's too painful for people to accept it. So they're like, I can't even go down that road. I'll just dismiss these arguments up front. And it's so deep, it never gets to the conscious level where they're thinking the thoughts I was just telling you. At the subconscious level, which is, far powerful than the conscious mind, the subconscious level is thinking, okay, if you accept that belief, that means this domino falls, this domino falls, this domino falls. That's too painful. So we're not even going to go to that level. And they just, at a much higher level, dismiss you and be like, oh, you're crazy. Chris is being, cuckoo Chris over here. I can't believe he's crazy talking right now, or whatever. They find some way to just dismiss it. And you never even get to the point of making like a logical argument, right? So what do? For me, what I do is I've just decided that the best thing for me to do is to just find ways to improve my life as much as possible. Live the life that I want to be living as much as possible. Not let these chains of government affect me any more than they possibly have to. I pay my taxes because I don't want to be in a prison cell. So I pay my taxes, but I don't let that bother me. Because you know what? If I sit there and I get angry when I'm writing out those checks and I'm like, God damn it, Uncle Sam, you all this stuff, I'm giving them more of my energy. I'm giving them more of my time, my mental power, that mental space. And I don't want to give them any more than I have to. I pay my blood money. I pay my protection money, to that government mafia, and I don't sweat it one other second. I'm like, I'm going to spend my time, my focus on the areas where I have the most power, and that's in the spheres of influence that are closer to me. So, spending most of my time and focus on improving myself, and then the next amount of time I spend on those people that are in those close relationships with me. And beyond that, I spend a lot of time on my podcast and trying to help other people as well. I guess I do have this hope that by working on personal development and helping people to heal their psychological wounds and become independent and happy, purpose-filled people, that it will then be easier for them to see past this fog that we have in our brains that masks the contradictions that you have to accept in order to accept government as the solution, to accept statism. There's so many contradictions involved, right? And my hope is that by working on personal development, and I'm actually helping to advance the freedom move by helping people to heal their trauma, and helping people to feel better about themselves and to lose weight and have health and energy, and improve their self-esteem and all of these things. Is it really leading us towards a more free world? I don't know. I don't know. But I've reached a point where I'm like, what, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to make my world a better place and help people around me that want to hear the message, help them to make their world a better place. And the people that aren't open to that message, I'm not going to spend my time on them because I have more than enough things to fill my day just helping the people that want help, that are seeking it, to help them improve their world, right? To help them to get over the pain, to heal the pain and suffering they've had, and to find their happiness. So, I still admire like the work that you're doing and other people are doing. And I think for some people that does help advance the cause. For me, I became a libertarian and an ANCAP before I really started working on my personal development, before I healed the wounds that I had. So I think it still can work. What you're doing, what other people are doing, it can still help advance the cause, but is it enough momentum to stop what's, the other forces that are out there? I don't know. Is it just a drop in the bucket that's insignificant? I honestly don't know. And I've just, like I said, at this point, I know that if I work on making my life better, that I do know will make me a happier person, someone living a more fulfilling life, so that's where I put my focus.
So one thing you said caught my attention. You said that you discovered and you finally became principled and accepted, the message of volunteerism. I don't want to make it sound like a religion, but you realized its merits and it clicked for you before you had any of these, subconscious level, traumas or whatever it may be that cloud a lot of people's judgments. And then earlier you said, the subconscious is so much more powerful than the conscious choices and thoughts. And I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree. Although I don't know because I haven't studied these things. I personally have such a hard time with that because, like, for me, it did take me some time, but eventually it was not that hard for me to surrender to reason. Like it was, I can trace out, the logical conversation that I had in my own head. And for people to, it just seems like so, like, how can you be so, such a slave to your, what's the word I'm looking for? I always feel like I'm in such control logically of my own beliefs. I sit and question these things and have internal conversations with myself. And it's not that hard, to admit that I'm wrong. But for other people, like you said, it seems like such a chore. But here's the thing. You and I are not geniuses. We're not like, superhuman reason machines.
Sure.
Why? I don't know. I suppose the proof is in the pudding, considering that this message is so hard for people to accept. Maybe that's all the proof I need. I just have such a hard time accepting that. Like, man, I suppose you all must have been, raped as kids or something. You've had these really, really
laugh, but I know what you're saying.
Deep issues. Yeah. Like abused, taken out to the shed every day. The fact that you can't even accept the idea that taxation is theft. Like, I can't believe how hard that is for some people. Even my own family and friends. It's like they just come up with excuse after excuse. It's like, what's wrong with you? What is going on in your head? Like, you and I grew up under the same roof. I know you, and not to get too personal with it, but like one of my own brothers. In fact, both of my brothers, they don't even listen to the show anyway. So why should I give a shit?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
One of my brothers is a lawyer, and his primary motivation or his reason for not accepting these arguments is religion, because he believes the Bible justifies it. So what did I do? I went off and spent weeks researching the Bible and writing this huge essay, which refuted every single claim. Even if you are a hardcore Christian, you can't, run back to that. And even still, he hasn't even read it fully. He doesn't care. My younger brother, I tried to explain to him that, cops are agents of the state and that taxation is theft, and he won't even hear any of it. My parents, they don't care. Very few of my friends, I'm probably lost more friends, throughout this whole process through Facebook. So yeah, I just find it absolutely astounding that either one, nobody cares, or two, the people who do care have such a mental blockade set up. I've never been able to understand that. How can people be so out of control of their own beliefs is beyond me.
Right. Yeah, I think one of it is people are really damaged, and I think my ability to accept this before I had healed a lot of my wounds was due to the fact that I wasn't nearly as damaged as a lot of other people that are out there. So there's that, right? Now, the other thing is, you're like, man, are these people, getting brutally raped every day? What's the problem? How did they get this? I think that, some of these people I grew up in the same household with, our experiences weren't that different, I do think that the development of the psyche and the trauma and the defenses, it can be different from one person to the next, and where whatever magic combination it is that needs to be in place for you to be able to start questioning this and to questioning what you've been told about government. It's not this benevolent entity and the like, and to start accepting some of the principles of anarcho-capitalism and the like. Whatever the magic mix is that requires you to be open to it. It just, and some people it's there, and other people it's not, and it's just some level of the wounding mixed with psychological defense. I guess what I'm getting at is, like, say you're talking to somebody about religion, and maybe you're talking about atheism, and they're a religious person. Instantly, there are pieces of their subconscious or even their conscious mind that will kick into place that are defenders, that come in to protect the status quo, and they will go on the defense, and they're ready to deflect things like, okay, we don't want to go into the logical area right now, because if we go into the logical area, that's almost sounding like it's hitting close to home. Like, there might actually be an argument there. We don't know how to win. So we're going to squash that part of the brain. That's the logical part of the brain. And And we're going to go into this part where we can totally just dismiss this argument completely and say, oh, my brother's a kook or whatever. Oh, he's just being emotional or whatever it is, whatever the defense is. There's all kinds of ways you can defend this. So just in some people, that psychic makeup where you have the parts of your brain that are willing to step up and defend the status quo are just stronger, more pronounced, or look different, whatever it is. Some people just have it and some people just don't. And I think that some people, I don't know, the ones that don't have the makeup there, I don't know how much would need to change before they would even be willing to question it. I think a whole lot would need to change, where other people whose psychic makeup is a little different are more open to it. And, like you and me, it's not because of our brilliant intellect. It was just we happened to have that combination that left us able to question our beliefs in this one area.
Mm-hmm.
So, because in the beginning, I know in the beginning when I started hearing these things, I would still question it and dismiss it. Like I remember when I started listening to Molyneux, I was still a statist. And I'd be like, well, he's right on this, this, and this, but I don't believe this or that. Or, I still had my excuses. But just I was open enough to it that the more I heard the arguments from him, reading other books, I started researching, other podcasts, reading books on it, reading, books on Austrian economics, and just one by one, I was open enough to the message and to learning more rather than just dismissing it and being like, oh, that's not, right. That I was able to overcome them, one brick at a time. I was able to take down that wall and see the truth. But just some people don't. They don't have that. Their defense is there, and I'm so thankful that I did have that combination where it was okay for me to question my beliefs and to reform, what my values and the like. 'Cause, I don't know who I would be if I didn't know that. So, but yeah, I guess maybe we're just lucky. I don't know.
Well, like you said, you were able to say, hey, he's right about this. I don't agree with the whole thing, but he's right about this. But at least that sets you down the right path. Like I am not an atheist. However, I'm easily able to entertain criticisms of, let's say, the Bible. Like I grew up in an extremely religious household. I still consider myself a Christian, but I do have no problem accepting that there are a lot of things in there and a lot of things that are said at church which make no sense whatsoever. They're completely contradictory, that are very problematic. And I don't know. I've just, like I said, I've been absolutely astounded by some people's inability to be honest with themselves. But oh well, I guess that's just the challenge we have. And I don't necessarily blame you for wanting to advance happiness in your life, because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. You have your life, your family, your friends, and that's you can't sacrifice your entire life to help people who ultimately are going to throw it right back in your face. But in any case, it's reaching about an hour here, Chris. We could probably go on and on. You're, like I said, you're an encyclopedia. I appreciate that all the work you're doing to help people in many different ways. I've been listening to your health related stuff. Very cool content. And, so I hope you keep doing what you're doing. You're always welcome to come back on the Flagship, but I think for now that's good enough. So, any final words, Chris, and where should our listeners go to find you?
Sure. Well, first of all, you're very kind, and, thank you for all the kind words and for the opportunity to speak with you and your crowd. So, that was really, really nice. So, in order to find out more, if you'd like to hear about some of the other things that I've been talking about in here, personal development and the like, or just if you want to go back and listen to the Stefan Molyneux series, that's at choiceconversations.com. Or if you just want to Google Choice Conversations, I think everything that comes up on the first page of a Google search is all me. So that's the best way to find me.
Is there another guy who shares your name or stole your name? Chris Stefanik. If I'm
Yes.
Googling that right now. Catholic.
I'm the other Chris Stefanik. So yeah, there's two Chris Stefaniks that are in the world that are more than just like normal people. I'm sure there's other Chris Stefaniks out there that are just normal guys that you would have no reason to know who they are. But as far as I hate to say, I won't say like celebrity because I'm not at that level, but as far as somebody you might actually know, there's me, and then there's a Catholic. I don't know if he's a priest. He might actually even be a priest.
Some kind of motivational.
He does a lot of motivational speaking and the like. And he's got more YouTube followers than me. So if you're talking to somebody and you mention Chris Stefanik and they're like, "Oh, I know him," chances are they're not talking about me. So just be forewarned.
There's a few Dan Engerers in the world as well, and one of them's an engineer just like me. But I like to think that I'm better than all of them. But one of them's in Malta, the other is somewhere else. Anyways, thanks a lot for following us all the way to the end. If you've made it this far, Chris, again, really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll have another conversation in the near future. All right.
Sounds good, Dan. Take care of yourself.
Thanks a lot.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I'm so grateful to get invited on the show. Really cool. If you're interested in those kind of topics, by all means, check out Flagship Freedom. As far as Liberty podcasts go, it's right up there near the top. So pretty cool to get a chance to go on there and talk a little bit about politics every now and then. If you would like to help out the show, one of the ways you can do that is to share the show on social media, talk to your friends about it, send them an email, say, "Hey, I just listened to this episode. You might be interested in it." That's how I find most of my podcasts is actually more so than people sharing them on social media. It's more like friends just saying, "Hey, I was listening to this and it was pretty interesting. They were talking about X, Y, and Z. Why don't you check it out?" And that's how I found most of the podcasts I listened to today. So if you could do that for me, that would be really great. All right. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, make the choice to be great.